Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our commitment is to help, hope, and healing of our veteran family and our nation. I'm Jim Blythe, a U.S. Navy veteran and a certified senior advisor. Join us as we continue the mission of leadership and commitment to our communities and our great country. Why, you never know where we're going to go or who you're going to meet. We invite you to join in, plug in, and share in what we do. This is your Veterans Impact Show. Well, great day and welcome aboard. I'm Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy veteran. Joining me, my co-host, Cedric White. Cedric, I just want to say thank you for all the things you did, and you got me the gig to do the military prayer at the National Day of Prayer at the Hope Center, and thank you. I just really wanted to thank you for that.
Well, Jim, thank you for your willingness. I had to be elsewhere, right? I was called to duty as the chaplain for the town of Prosper to do the day of prayer there. And thank you for filling in for me. And from what I understand, you did an exceptional job.
Well, we're Navy, you know.
There you go. That's
and
what we do.
Joining us today is a very close friend of ours, Marc Liebman, U.S. Navy captain, helicopter SAR rescue pilot, author, leader,
speaker,
blogger, you name it, right?
Historian,
yeah. But today, before we get started, I just want to say a special thank you to DBTV and AUN for putting us on the air on Amazon Fire, Roku, and all of the wonderful places. So go take a look at the DBTV schedule, and you'll see us on Saturday, you'll see us on Sunday, and you'll see us on Wednesday. I also want to say a special thank you to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage. My NMLS number is 311548, and the corporate one is 2289, Equal Opportunity Lender. Now the attorneys are happy. And then on top of that, I want to say a thank you to Symbiosis Integrative Health for all they're doing to save people's lives. Yes. And then most of all, I want to thank Cedric in his fabulous marriage ministry that they do, Healing Thine Hearts.
Yes, sir.
I mean, that is the best marriage counseling deal I have ever been to, and it is designed specifically for veterans. So if you want to know more about that, just contact us, send me an email. Let's see what we can do to help you. Now, I introduced Marc Liebman, SAR rescue pilot. We were just talking about the fact of stories, like you were out there the same time I was when Bull Simons went after the POWs. We were talking about some of the things that went on. With that, what we really are talking about is the importance of writing your story. And since you're a published author with 17 books, several of them best sellers.
Yeah, Amazon bestsellers.
Amazon bestseller. Marc, tell us a little bit why you got started writing and how, but most of all, motivation for writing, because we've been talking about that.
Yeah. So the writing business is you either have to do it or you don't. I mean, it's because there's no halfway position. So people who want to write a book and want to tell a story, now whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is academic at this point. But you have to understand that if you want to write a book, you got to sit down and do it. And it takes patience. It takes dedication. It takes time. And oh, by the way, the creativity aspect of it is about number 5 on the list of things that has to be done, or the categories. So the question is always why. Is it like me? It was a lifelong goal. I always wanted to be a novelist. I waited till I got out of the Navy or retired from the Navy because it made things easier, particularly if I want to write about things that took place during my Navy career. And then there's another reason: write a memoir. I'm a Vietnam vet, and I'm a Desert Storm vet, and I'm a vet of a couple other things. So the fact of the matter is, if we do not tell our stories, somebody else is going to do it, and there's a great probability that they're going to get it wrong. So you tell your own story, you tell it in your words. Now, it doesn't mean you have to write it down on a piece of paper or use a computer. You can do it as an oral history, like have somebody with an iPad literally record you, and you just go through it. You want to tell the stories, even if you don't have done a lot of research, because these C stories are very important. They become what we call first sources or primary sources. And a historian 50 years from now, long after we're all gone, will come back and he'll look at those, he'll watch them, he'll listen to them, and then he'll corroborate them with others and get a much better feel of what really went on. So
Can I ask you a question
Sure.
real quick? Because you're knee deep in it. You have the experience, and you got 17 books. What made you? Did you have a desire to be a novelist, or was it just there was a story inside of you you had to get out? What made you want to start writing it down and publishing?
It's a little of both, but mostly I've always wanted to do it.
Okay.
And my mother encouraged me. My mother made she rest in peace. It's just something that you do. Writers write. And it's just the way I hate to use the words, an addiction or a compulsion.
Right.
But it is. And I write pretty much every day. There are some days I take off, but pretty much I'm working at my craft, either researching or writing or editing 365 days a year. It goes back to again the motivation of what you want to do. So some people want to do this because they want to share their knowledge.
Right.
First, both of you are in the self-help business or the help business and the healing business.
Yes.
So you've got stories to tell and techniques and tools and case studies and all that kind of good stuff. So that's called sharing your knowledge.
Right.
And it can be done. And then there are other people who want to just they want to document history. I became friends with one of the best naval historians of our era. Unfortunately, he's passed away for 4 or 5 years, named James Hornfisher. He's a fabulous storyteller and fabulous historian. He wrote some great books about World War II. One of my favorite one is Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. But Jim's motivation was because he wanted to tell history and look at it again, look at some of these events again, because new stuff is always materializing. So what happens is, in his case, is as people pass on, they hand off diaries, and they hand off notes and letters and stuff like this, and suddenly that becomes part of the public record, or it gets picked up by a museum, and now you have another perspective, and that allows you to do that. And then the last thing is some people do it just to entertain people. That's part of being a novelist. That's one of the reasons I put humor in my books, both black and funny humor, or funny. It's part of the entertainment. The other thing is I write. When I talk about flying in a helicopter, I try to put the reader literally right here next to the pilot, so he sees, smells, fears, senses everything that the character is feeling. So that's part of the entertainment part. But anyway, if you're going to do this for money, don't. Unless you're John Grisham or you're lucky like Stephen Kuntz, who worked for me when I was in the Navy. Unless you're one of those guys and just hit it right, it's very difficult to make money as a novelist. And I tell people, I get this asked all the time at book signings. I said, look, if I had to make a living at this, I'd be living in a box under a bridge. And then when I ran out of battery, I'd be in deep doo-doo.
Right. But you said something that really stuck out to me, and that is, you write 365 days a year. So I'm thinking about that guy, much like myself. I wrote my book, and by the time I finished, I was so tired of reading my own book. I was just done. If it had not been for my wife, it would have never gotten published, right? But for you are a writer. But for that guy out there, that lady, that person that has a story, but they're not going to be a Marc Liebman.
Yeah. So
what would you say to them?
That's a great segue to what we're going to do next. So there's 3 steps in this process.
Okay.
And there are 3 things that you have to do. So one is you have to sit down and write the manuscript. That's actually, strangely enough, the easiest. The second thing is you got to find a publisher. And now with self-publishing, you don't have to do that. But back in the old days when I started, ebooks and self-publishing didn't exist.
Right.
So finding a publisher, finding an agent, that whole process, it's a pain in the ass. It's a quirky, unfair process that's dominated by a select few people. And I say few, I'm not talking about a handful, I'm talking about a couple thousand.
Got you.
And then there is the hardest part, which is publishing the book. So that's the money thing. And it's publishing, it's not publishing, promoting the book. So if you want to promote the book, great. But there's things that you got to do. You got to do things like interviews. You got to do things like book signings, and you got to find a way to get it out there, because Amazon and it's called BookBub and all these distributors won't help you unless you pay them to advertise.
Right.
So you have to figure that out. But anyway, coming back to the motivation for somebody who doesn't do this is because I do this in workshops for writers all the time. I'm primarily for veterans organizations, but I help other people. There's a process that I follow, and I follow it pretty much every time. Did I know the process when I started? Hell no. It evolved. So it starts with what I call a kernel, which is a paragraph or two about the who, what, when, where. Okay? That's the first step.
Right.
You got to get that down pat. So if this is your life history and your time as a gunner's mate on a nuclear-powered cruiser, well, now that's the dates of the cruise.
Right.
That's now where you were, what you were doing.
Right.
Okay. And then that is the basics of the novel. So the next thing you do after that is you, or at least the next thing I do, is I create what's called a story concept. So that's less than 2 pages, but it's who's now I'm starting, what's the characters?
Right.
What kind of events am I going to cover? So there's more detail. So I now have I'll use the word painting of a book, but it's again the who, what, where, when.
Right.
But now I've got characters. What's some of their characteristics?
Gotcha.
Who's the bad? If you write a novel, you have an antagonist. So who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist? What time frame is this going to happen? That's in there. Again, it's not precise like September 1st, 1970 to August 3rd, 1972. It's 1970, 1972. You don't have to get precise, but enough so that you now have painted a picture and you can look at the book up, like I said, it's like a painting. So you can look at the book and say, okay, now I know where I'm going.
Gotcha.
The next thing is the fun part, and I talk about this fun part. You sit down and write an outline. Now I do a bullet outline. So all my chapters have titles. It's generally I use the word preliminary, but the first pass at the chapter titles, and it's bullets. Okay? I'm not trying to write text. I typically will get about half to 3/4 of the way, and I'll get fed up. I'll get fed up with the outline, and I'll sit down and start writing the book.
Right.
Okay? I will tell you right now, in every book that I've ever done, with every outline, the characters become you, or you become the characters, actually. And so the characters have minds of their own, and they do things, and they don't follow the outline. And I'm serious. And it's kind of, I say it's kind of funny, but you sit there writing and you get really involved with it because you become that character.
Right.
And you're pecking away and you're going, this person's doing this, that, and the other thing. And you go, oh my God.
Starts to take a life of his own.
And then you have the bad guy. What's he doing? Well, and then you become the bad guy for a day or a couple hours. And then suddenly you got these two people doing things in different worlds, and it's not following your outline.
Gotcha.
And it will, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But because what the outline is really there to do is to give you an audit trail and direction.
Gotcha.
Okay, so now you got the finished manuscript, and then the real work begins because you got to polish it, you've got to edit it. I spend on the Age of Sail novels I've written probably in the first draft 50 to 60% of my time doing research, reading things like John Paul Jones's log from the Ranger in 1778. It's on the Naval History Heritage Command's website, documents of the American Revolution. You can find it.
Okay.
I found articles from Joseph Hughes to Stephen Hopkins on what they call the Marine Committee. Some people call it the Maritime Committee. And they're arguing via letters of who should be a captain of a naval vessel. Okay, and they had totally different opinions. By the way, there's no ship ever named Hopkins in the United States Navy, but there are several named Hughes who wanted them to be picked because on merit. Hopkins wanted to take captains from the Boston area who are merchant ship captains. And then there was this guy by the name of, you probably never heard of, called John Paul Jones, who kept telling, and was a friend of Hughes, who said, they've got to have experience in the Navy because being a naval officer is different from being a merchant ship officer. And so let me get. So this is another thing. So this becomes an educational process, particularly if you're like me, you're writing a historical novel. If you're writing a fantasy novel, you've got to create the whole world. Right. You've got to create the timeline, the world, and all that kind of good stuff. That's well beyond my level of competence. But so you wind up reading these things, and I wound up reading letters from John Paul Jones, and I found the original letter that he wrote, the famous words, "in harm's way." Well, if you look at the context of that letter and you understand the thing, he had just fought Serapis with Bonhomme Richard, a guy by the name of Pierre Landais, who was on Alliance, tried to kill him because he was pissed because Jones was given the command of this group of 3 ships, American ships, or Continental Navy ships, that were fighting Serapis and the other British ships in that squadron that were escorting a convoy. Anyway, so he's back in Paris, and he's frustrated because the command of the ship that he had been promised, which happened to turn out to be the frigate Alliance, it was being repaired and it was not coming about. And he's begging the American representative in Paris, who's a friend, to get the French ministry to give him a ship, a fast ship to sail him into harm's way. Any ship. Okay. Also, you find out his views on what it takes to be a good naval officer. And the first one is he's got to be a good seaman.
Well, so what you're saying, if I can interrupt, what you're really saying is going back to these historical documents and reading what they actually said and wrote is hugely important, because the people that will come subsequently, if they don't look at those, they ain't going to get it right. They're going to put whatever political, ideological bent that they want to on history. They're going to rewrite history.
Correct.
Okay. And especially for those of us who are Vietnam.
Yeah.
That was such a controversial war. And there's been so much that has been, I think, either negated or added to. And one of the things in a book...
Use the word wrong.
Wrong, yeah. In the book Stolen Valor, I interviewed that guy back in 2015.
David Hackworth.
And one of the things, he told stories about how the press came in and they changed the whole thing. They did the program the way they wanted it and to say what they wanted to say, not what actually happened.
So I saw that in Desert Storm.
You saw it in Desert Storm?
Yeah.
We know that there's a different mindset quite often when the media takes control of it.
Yeah, and so first of the things is the motivation is to get it right for history. The second one I want to talk more about when we come back, which is some of the healing portion of this, because that's something, Cedric, you have more experience with. But one of the things I know is when you tell your story, a lot of things change. And there's so many people, Vietnam veterans, there were World War II veterans,
yes.
There were Korean War veterans, and we just lost General Richard G. Carey, and his funeral is actually today while we're recording, or we'd be there. You want to tell the story. So we're going to be right back. We're going to talk more about telling your story, why it's healing, why it's important, and how you can go about it. This is Jim Blythe and Cedric White with Marc Liebman. We're here for you on Veterans Impact Show. Hey, follow us, join us, be a part of it. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Heart's Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation. This is a delightful conversation because I have enjoyed your book so much. When I read your first book, Cherubs 2, this is a true story. You can ask him. I called him up and I said, wait a minute. This is not fiction. This is fact, because I was there on the Oriskany when this happened. And you laughed and said, yeah, I had to change some names to keep from
more than names, but yeah, there's more fact than fiction.
But and you were there when Bull Simon's I was there when the Americas showed up. And so these things bring to life not only the adventures we had, but for the future generations of our family. You know, there are so few veterans today in our nation. So telling the story is so giving that to posterity, giving that to your family. But there's another part of that, which is the healing part of it. And I think you made a point about being authentic with it, Marc. So tell us what you're talking about there.
Yeah, so this is a partly personal, but partly something I learned. It's incredibly cathartic. Couldn't get the word out. So here's the thing: is when I came back from my first tour in Vietnam, my dad literally met me with a 6-pack, and we went on the porch, the back of our house, and we talked. I don't know how much beer I drank that day or that afternoon, But I know my dad and I talked. Now, my dad did 2 tours in World War II, a tour in Korea, was in Vietnam. So he had been through this, and nobody had ever done this before with him. And I believe it's one of the reasons why I don't suffer from any sort of when I say any sort, we all have PTSD for various things, but I didn't suffer from PTSD. We have way too many veterans who do not want to talk about their experience because it's painful mentally.
Yes.
Sometimes it's painful physically. Sometimes the mental stress brings back the physical pain, or vice versa. But you should do it. I'm not saying you have to do it. And I also talked to a lot of veterans who say, well, I didn't do much. Well, in fact, yesterday, I'm at the Frontiers of Flight Museum in honor of the heroes presentation. I was just telling Jim as we were prepping for this. And this guy walks up and we start talking. And he says, oh, you're a naval aviator. Yeah, what'd you fly? I flew helicopters. Well, what'd you do? Well, I was a bosun mate, an aviation bosun mate. And what'd you do? I was a taxi director on a carrier. And I didn't do much. Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You're 18 years old, 19 years old, and you're directing airplanes around a flight deck. And if you make a mistake, bad things are going to happen. Either the fixed wing airplane is going to go off the deck, or it's going to worse. It's going to run into another one, and it could be a big boom and a fire, and we're all got a problem. And he said, but I just did that for 2 years. Really? How many accidents were airplanes in when you taxied around? Well, none. Yes. And I said,
huge.
It's huge. And I said, you have stories from that, funny stories. Some may be sad, some may be pithy, scary. Mm-hmm. But those stories need to be told because, again, as I said earlier in this presentation, 50 years from now, there's not going to be somebody who's taxiing an F-14 around the flight deck of the USS Kitty Hawk. Okay, and somebody's going to read that or watch it if you do it on video. And there are associations, and Jim and I were talking about this. Can I use the names?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are lots of associations that do this. If you're an Army helicopter pilot and you flew in Vietnam, the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association does this. The Association of Army Aviation does it. They have an archive of it. The Naval History and Heritage Command through the U.S. Naval Institute do it. And you can pretty much go through every one of the major veterans organizations. If they do not do it, they know somebody who does. And there's a process that they follow. You get a questionnaire generally. You set up time. I've done it via Zoom. I've done it in person. And it's great. And it's, like I said, it's from a healing perspective, mm-hmm. It's really cathartic. It really helps you because you get it out. And again, I talk to people all the time, and their fathers in Vietnam or Korea or grandfathers, and they never talked about it, and they really don't know what they did. Okay, here's another thing you can do, is you can have your service member, or if the service member's left us, then you can get some of his documents, and you can go to the National Military Personnel Center, and you can get their entire personnel record, either electronically or paper. I did that for my dad. I learned stuff about him that I had no idea. One of the things I wound up with was a lot of his mission reports from World War II. Where did these come from? That led me to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and I now have copies of every mission he flew in North Africa. So it's really, really helpful for you as a family and for the generations to come, because I can then share this, like, I have a grandson who is a corpsman in the United States Navy, and he was asking about, what did my dad do? Well, he did this and did that. And I could go back, and I could hand him a an audio tape, because I got some of it on audio tape, and I could show him documents and put the pieces together. Wow. But if I didn't have the audio tape, he'd never hear the mm-hmm. voice. If I didn't have the documents, he really wouldn't see history. And because I've done it now, my kids and grandkids can see me. 50 years from now, even though I like to kid people, kiddingly I say this, I'm immortal because I have proof. Yeah. Hey, anybody who's got 3,000 hours in a Navy helicopter built by the lowest bid.
Yeah, I know. I tried to take care of those helicopters. They're bad. Yeah,
so and then plus the fact, the North Vietnamese couldn't kill me, the Iraqis couldn't kill me. Anyway, I'll just go on. My point is that they'll be able to go back into the archives, dial up Captain Marc Liebman, and they'll be able to see my interview. Okay, and not just my grandchildren, but my great grandchildren and generations to come. and historians can have access to it as well. And it's, again, just not me, but it is, like I said, I keep telling you, it's something that you ought to do, because for those who are struggling with what they did, this will help heal them. And I found that veterans talking to veterans is a far better way of getting it out in the open than it is talking to healthcare professionals. Now, it's just a Marc Liebman.
Without a doubt, I couldn't agree more, because a military peer network that I've been involved in, working with suicide prevention, telling your story gets it out. It's not easy, but once it comes out, and Cedric, you'd agree with me. So when we come back, let's deep dive more into telling your own story and why that's so critically important for you and your family. We've been talking about that. Let's dive a little bit deeper. And I'll tell you the story about my dad. So this is Veterans Impact Show. Jim Blythe and Cedric White here. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation. Well, welcome back. This is Jim Blythe and Cedric White. You were a gunner's mate.
I was a gunner's
I
mate.
was aviation maintenance, and you were a SAR rescue pilot. And let me tell you something, the Navy was the best thing that ever happened to me
too.
at that time in my life. Now, I didn't get to have the wonderful adventure you did, but I was there when a lot of it happened.
If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't survive.
That's exactly right. And those hooky tooks that you flew, man alive, I got to tell you, we were praying for you guys every time you went up.
Don't say that. I took off in all innocence.
And I got to tell you, when you're on a carrier, when you're on with, back in those days, 3,500 people on the O-boat and the Hancock, or if you're on one of the super carriers, you get really close to a lot of people. I mean, they become, and you were on a nuclear cruiser.
And it doesn't glow in the dark.
No.
Well, maybe.
He's got a. Let me tell you, he is anointed, and his personality when he preaches is.
That's a whole other conversation.
That's no other conversation.
U.S. nuclear power ships did not leak.
Right.
So let's just say that. Unlike those of other navies in the world that are generally not democracies, our nukes don't leak, and we don't have accidents.
Yeah. But to go back to telling the story, one of the things is I had a really good friend, and he passed away not too long ago. And I asked him one time, we were down there, and I said, would you please tell your story? Boy, he got angry and got up and left. No, I can't go back through that. I lived through that. I think it could have helped him. I think it could have helped him a whole lot to recover. But I also think, in my opinion, he was what we call, what was it, the Brownwater Navy?
Yep, Brownwater Navy, yep.
The Mud Marines?
No, Brownwater Navy is correct.
Brownwater Navy. And let me tell you something, some of the things he did say to me, he said, you have no idea what it's like to be going through a canal and you got jungle within just a few feet of you on either side and have a hand grenade suddenly land on the back of your fantail of your boat.
Yep.
And he was there when that happened. I think these are things that people would never understand if a first person didn't tell the story of what that was like and how dangerous that was.
Here's what we see, Jim, and whether it's prior military or just people who have suffered trauma in their lives, a lot of people carry some things and they're triggered by other things, and those around them have no clue as to why they respond, why they speak, why they act, why they're recluse. And if they would only share, right, whether it's via novel, via diary, whatever, journal, they'd only get that out. But a lot of people, they pressed it down, but it still has an external behavior effect from their internal organism, what's going on mentally. They're carrying this and they're triggered by those things, and people don't understand why. And that's because they're carrying this load that they really don't have to continue to carry. We have a saying in our ministry, God won't fix what you won't face. You need to face those things.
So let me tell you some interesting story. I do these workshops at various military associations. And one guy sat down with me one day and said, look, I don't want anybody, I'm not interested in getting this published. I just want to tell my story.
Yeah.
And I said, I want my kids and grandkids. So he wrote, and I use the word diary form because it starts saying, this is the day I enlisted, this is what I remember, blah, 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 all the way through his 2 tours in Vietnam. And about a year, the next time I saw him, which was about a year and a half, I guess 2 years later, he said, God, that was good. I said, what do you mean it was good? He says, once I got it down, he used the word paper, it was electronic.
Right.
It said I didn't have to worry about grammar. I said I've gone back and I've had cleaned it up, but it's me talking to myself about what went on. And now that I've read it, I feel so much better because a lot of those, he used the word demons. Are gone.
Yeah.
Can I talk about another group? So we, United States, are a nation of immigrants. My in-laws were immigrants from Russia, or Soviet Union. My father's father was an immigrant from Germany. My mother's side came to the United States much earlier, but they came from the Netherlands, from Spain. My point is this, is many of these immigrants have particularly have really interesting stories.
Oh, yeah.
And those are the same stories that we didn't do the same thing because, again, this is our history. This is the United States DNA. We are one of the few nations, in fact, I think we're the only nation, that has been able to assimilate incredibly diverse groups of people who come to this country for a variety of reasons. I don't want to get into why people come to this country on the fact that it's a land of opportunity. And if you're talking about the 1890s, it was known as this place where the streets were paved with gold. But if I actually have spent hours talking to my father-in-law and my mother-in-law about why and how they got to the United States. It's not a pretty story.
Right.
But it's a story, but every one of them, every immigrant in this country, not every, but most of them, didn't just get on an airplane, show up with a passport and say, I'm here to become a U.S. citizen. Most of them had to go through some kind of hassle, trauma, whatever, to get here. And so, like veterans, that's inside them. But most of those stories are wonderful to hear when they talk about why they did it. I mean, when you think about this, just again, I'm going to come back to because another thing is part of the Age of Sail stuff I've done, and I always have immigration or immigrants in my novels because I find this a fascinating story. Why they come and how they get there, the motivations are fascinating, and they will quite often arrive in this country with nothing but the clothes on their back,
Right.
and that's it, and dreams.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. They have dreams to have a better life, not so much for them because they're typically mostly adults,
Right.
but for their kids.
Mark, I have to step in right there when you're talking about dreams. Part of some of the exercises that we'll do with people that we see in our office is we say, okay, I go to the board and I tell them, tell me about your dreams. Right, tell me about your dreams, and in today's society, because I'm paralleling what you're saying. People who come here with nothing but the clothes on their back and their dreams, but then you have people who are here and have opportunities galore, and the biggest dream they could have is
I want to be a social media influencer.
not even that. I want a new car. It's like that's a dream, really. That's like, to me, that's a responsibility. You need to have a car, right?
Necessity.
But I'm like, let's talk about dreams because we're going to get into goals. We're going to get into plans. We're going to get into steps. And so things like that. But a lot of these people that need to tell their story, right? They open up the dreams and the imaginations of their legacy, of people who really don't know anything about them. Jim was at my house the other day, and we got to talking about the Navy, right? Just different things. And my wife was sitting back, and we've been married 27 years. She said, Cedric, I've never heard that. I didn't know that.
Oh, my wife says that to me all the time.
Yeah.
I've been married 56 years.
yeah.
So
When I first got married to Diane, I said, there is a trigger.
Yes.
And don't pull it.
Yes.
And literally, I went through every firefighting school in the Navy. I never had to fight a fire on a ship. I was on the risking it when we had a plane hit the round down, an F-8 Crusader. And I mean to tell you, it caught everything on fire, but it was flash and over, and we were all fine. But I have this aversion to fire, something fierce. And I learned real hard because somebody thought it was funny many years ago to walk into the room and yell, "Fire!" And I darn near hurt them getting out of there because you were trained, get those pants, get those boots, get that shirt on, and get down. And you had less than 3 minutes to get.
So I want to talk about dreams here for a second because this is part of the healing process. Diane, call up this slide on the books.
Okay.
So, and this is not a promotion for my books, but I want to talk about this because every one of these novels, there are immigrants and there are people who have hopes and dreams, and that's what makes people like me go. I had a dream. I want to be a novelist. Voila, there's 17 of them. So we all have this. But the really interesting thing is that I learned about, again, researching this whole thing about immigration, is they had dreams and the United States gave them opportunities which were not available, particularly in the age of sail, but where they are today. I mean, if you think about this for a second, even today, people are flooding into this country. I don't want to get into the immigration issue from a political standpoint, but these people are coming here for a reason. Okay, they're either suppressed politically, there's economic issues more likely. Okay, there may be religious issues. Okay, all of those things that they want to get out from where they were. And in the 1790s, the United States had something that no European citizen, unless you remember the nobility, had to give, and that was called land.
You could buy land.
Yeah. And so our founding fathers were smart enough to set up these programs where you could buy land. And then, so guess what? These people didn't have any money. Well, we'll loan you the money to buy the land. So this became a source of income for the federal government. And these people went out and created homes and stuff like that. And the other thing that they did in the 1790s, there's a Land Act of 1797, which they stipulated that out of every 100 acres we sell, you county, you state, local government must set aside 10 acres for schools to educate everybody, men and women. And they use the word everybody. And if you go back and read the notes from these guys in the law, it means men, women, and children. And there was no distinction about color or status or anything like that. And then the other thing that they did is they said, oh, by the way, for every 10,000 acres, you must create a school of higher learning, university, college, available to, guess what? Everybody. So now you have two things: land, education, okay? And the first 15 words of the U.S. Constitution says, Congress shall make no law restricting, affecting about religion, okay? Okay, so suddenly Huguenots, Jews, Catholics, because in England, Catholics couldn't be citizens until the middle 1800s. There's a law literally that passed in England that allowed Catholics to become citizens. So you figure whatever religion you were, to practice their religion. So these are the kinds of things that motivate people, and these are the dreams and opportunities. But these are all things that your families or our families, because we're a nation of immigrants, all have, and those stories need to be told, and there are not enough of them.
Right.
I found lots and lots of stuff researching the Age of Sail series on immigration and people coming to this country, and it's fascinating. It's a rabbit hole, but it's fascinating.
You know, it really is. And you're talking about immigrants who came from other countries. My family came from North Carolina. Now, prior to that, several generations back, came from England, came from Scotland. But here's the thing. They came after the Civil War. They were just regular kind of farmers. They were teachers. They were ministers. They were not plantation owners. They were not slave owners. But the conditions in the Deep South, the Carolinas, Virginia, and all that, were so intolerable that they came back here, and they came to Sykes, Texas. They came to Corsicana, and they brought with them a real desire to do exactly that. They were immigrants to state of Texas from within the United States, and they had dreams and hopes and things that they wanted to do. And I think that they brought a lot of that. And you talk about not only that, but we had a huge number of German people come to Texas in that period of time.
Fredericksburg.
Yeah, 1700s, 1800s. I got to tell you, we are all immigrants. Some were forced, obviously, the African American people. But where would we be without that culture?
Right.
Music, food. And without the Mexican culture, where would we be? Because there's not a restaurant in Dallas that you walk into the kitchen and the chef is Spanish, Mexican. I mean, they do a great job. And so instead of working against each other, which has happened for many, many years, I think we're changing now to where we're not more tolerant. We don't even have to think about that to be tolerant. We're working together now, better than ever before. Would you agree?
There's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Right, from the perspective of intolerance and lack thereof. But much of what we do here is to show the ability to just collaborate. I'm a firm believer everybody has a right to their own opinion. Everybody has a right to their own ideology. But the bottom line is, in order for this country to survive, we need to work together. In order for us to be better, we need to be together. We're not going to be better and everyone has their own silos and their own trying to create their own separatism. We need to be together. That's how we can continue to be the powerhouse that we need to be around the world.
Well, here's the other. Okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. So this whole issue about documenting our origins, let's just call it that.
Yeah.
The real recipient is after we do it for ourselves, and that goes back to this whole thing about why we write our memoirs or why we record them, is not us. It's our children.
Yes.
It's our children's children. So I spend a fair amount of time with my grandkids, and I get, some of them are really interested in what I did. Some of them were not. Some of them are really interested in my wife's family, and some of them are not. But the fact of the matter is we can tell those stories to them and show them is part of their life experience, okay? And it tends to shape them. And it tends to shape, when I say shape them, I'm talking about both in a positive way in terms of giving them direction, say, hey, if you decide to do this, you can do it. Well, no, I can't. Yeah,
Yes,
you
you
can.
can.
And here's how. Or here's the path. So it's really cool to watch how that happens. But again, I have a granddaughter who is about to start vet school. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Well, there's no vets in our family. Well, actually, there is one. But so I put her in contact with a cousin who is about to go at that point go through vet school, and so they had this communication, and it helps shape their thinking. I've had numerous conversations with my grandson who's a corpsman, and why he wanted to go into the Navy, and yada yada yada. It's all about
just telling that story.
They understand where their families come from, because if you don't have that, it leaves a void in your life.
Yeah, and all about relationships. All right, we're going to take another break, and then we'll be right back to continue this conversation. We're talking about writing your own book, and you need to do it. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation. Boy, what a great conversation I think we're having today with Marc Liebman, Navy SAR pilot, unbelievable, retired captain, career author, had a dream of being an author, 17 published books, Amazon bestseller books. And I got to tell you, I want my kids to have this, my sons to have Marc's book about Cherubs 2 and Big Mother 40, because that's Vietnam. That was where I was. And I want to have these stories where they really understand what happened. I want them to have a better understanding of me too, because I had problems. I'm not perfect. I wasn't the greatest dad all the time. At least I wanted to be, and I tried to be. And Cedric, I know you've probably been through the same thing. So telling your story, so incredibly important.
Yeah. So let me share something with you. So, again, I write about people in the Navy because that's my kind of overriding genre. I love the Navy. So in Cherubs 2, you get to meet a young character by the name of Derek Vanderjack. And at age 17 and plus, 17, 18, he's a senior in high school. Hasn't graduated yet. He is part of an armed robbery. He's, and the story goes, which is actually based on a real guy, and this is what really happened. He was the driver of the getaway car. Kids go in, the two kids get in the car, go into this liquor store, hold it up, shoot somebody, run out. The alarm goes off. There's a police car apparently right nearby. Kids get arrested. So Derek is sitting in the courtroom. And he said, "Oh, look, I had nothing to do with the robbery. I was the getaway driver. Yes, I'm an accomplice." So the judge says to Derek the real Derek Vanderjack, he says, "Derek, you have a choice. Trial, possible conviction, go to jail, or sitting over there as a guy in a white sailor's uniform, we call them Cracker Jack Whites.
Yeah,
it's the sailor uniform that's white, and it's back in before the days they started changing all the uniforms. Right? And I said, and there may be some other recruiters, but you have a choice. Go enlist." So he goes, he makes the right choice, goes, talks to this enlisted guy, and he joins the Navy. And the enlisted guy was wearing a pair of aircrew wings. And he said, what are those for? Because Vanderjack would tell you he was a pretty punky, a juvenile delinquent would be the term that we would use in our. And he said, "Look, I'm a rescue air crewman. I'm a rescue swimmer, actually, is what we called them in those days. And I'm an air crewman, and I was an aviation machinist mate. That's how my enlisted rate, because in those days it wasn't a separate rate. And you can go to boot camp if your scores and your tests are good enough, you can qualify that, and you can go and volunteer to become a rescue swimmer." And Derek says, I'll do that. So he goes off to boot camp. I meet him when he's an E4. Okay, he's one of my rescue air crewmen. Unfortunately, about 6 months ago, I was the speaker at his funeral of retired Command Master Chief Derek blank, that's his actual first name. He spent 30 years in the Navy, and he will tell you that moment changed his life.
Wow.
And I start to well up about this. I mean, you would not meet a finer young man back those days. But we became friends. We became friends for life. Okay.
Wonderful.
And I got a phone call. I knew he was ill. I got a phone call one day. "Hey, Derek wants you to give the analogy, Captain, sir," from his wife. So we sat around after the funeral, and I said, "Let's all tell Derek's stories."
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Isn't that great?
Anyway,
You're right. And what is the best thing, going in the Navy was the best thing for me, because I was not doing well in college. I didn't like the college I was at, and vice versa. Going back, I was a straight A student. So what did the Navy teach me? They taught me leadership. They taught me to set priorities. They taught me to plan. They taught me how to
Discipline.
get things accomplished. And when things start going real wrong, they taught me how to adapt and overcome. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I think it's true of many, many people. And I don't ever want to make light of that. So I need to just say, quick call to action. Would you please either get with somebody, you can contact us because we can get people, and either tell your story and get it videotaped, write your story. This is important.
Even if it's just for yourself.
Exactly. Even if it's just for yourself. But it's not going to be. It's going to be for future generations. Then the other thing that I want to say in that call to action is sign up. If you're a Vietnam veteran, if you're the Desert Storms veteran, sign up for programs to be a mentor. There are so many children in single parent families. There are so many children who don't know us. I'm talking about veterans, don't know this honor, don't know the responsibility, don't know what we went through. But it's not about what we went through. It's what we as men need to do is speak into these young people's lives, men and women. Diane and I are involved with Sea Cadets, and I also am involved with the Naval ROTC. I've been giving out their awards. So it's important for this nation, for the next generation, that you be a part of telling your story, but helping them to understand what did happen, and then give them a vision of what they can do, just like your friend Derek, what they can accomplish. And this is incredibly important.
Can I add one thing to that?
Okay, quickly.
It's because of people like sitting in this table, is that the other people in that classroom or anywhere else can enjoy the freedoms that they enjoy today.
That's right.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Cedric, I always like to close with a prayer. You let me do the National Day of Prayer, so why don't you close us with a prayer real quick as we go out.
We'll do that. So, Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for people like Marc who are willing to go below the surface, go and dig to get the truth and then share that truth, Father God, in a way that we can take it in. Father, we thank you for that. We thank you for the stories that will come forth, even from today, people who are willing to open up and face themselves, face their fears, Father God, and share with those who are coming along behind them. Lord, continue to bless us in everything that we do and continue to bless this great nation. Continue to make it one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Thank you so much, Cedric. And guys, share this. Be a part of Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you.